Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation, the Car Company Tycoon game. Continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company. In my last video, I wrapped up the year period of 2002, finishing off the last model for that year period, and we now have a complete car company lineup. And now it's time to progress on to the next year period. Before this year period, 2006, I'm only going to focus on one model. I'm not going to do any of the other models because I don't feel like there would be enough changes from 2002 to this year period to warrant it. But we're going to have the introduction of a new model. Well, honestly, it's a new model, but an old model at the same time. So let's go ahead and hop into the base trim here. And the model we're going to be looking at is the Shooting Star. And if you've followed my series from its beginning, I started off role-playing the Edison Car Company in 1946, and we progressed our way through 60 years of history all the way up to 2006. And one of my older car models was the Shooting Star, which was more or less a muscle car. Now, with the popularity of the Mustang in the mid-2000s, you had an upsurge in popularity of the muscle car concept. And as a result, other American car companies followed suit by reintroducing old car brands that were previously muscle cars. So you had GM reintroducing the Chevy Camaro, and you had Chrysler reintroducing the Dodge Challenger. And we're going to follow suit as well with the reintroduction of the Shooting Star. So in keeping with the original concept of the Shooting Star, in that it is a rebodied star. So I'm using the same platform, or body at least as far as the selection here, as the Star, but restyling it for that more performance-oriented muscle car look. So it goes from a 4-door body to a 2-door body. And again, I resculpt the lines for that more performance-oriented look. For the chassis, we have a monocoque chassis, AHS steel, front longitudinal engine placement rather than the front transverse that we have for the normal Star, McPherson strut up front, and semi-trailing in the rear. Now, this is not a sports car in the sense like a Comet, where we're trying to go with the best handling we can get. This is more about straight line performance, straight line speed, as a muscle car tends to be. So that's what kind of dictated the suspension that I chose. I know solid axle would be a little bit more authentic, but that is something that my car company has strayed away from for a number of years, so there's no sense in going back to it. And then for the panel material, I went with corrosion-resistant steel. Now, I already showed off the styling, but as we discussed, this is longitudinal and with a rear-wheel drive setup. The engine we use in this trim is a detuned version of the same engine used in the Comet, the V6 engine that's used in the Comet. So, setup-wise, this is just, as I said, a detuned version of that engine. So it's got a lot of similarities. So this is a V6 with aluminum silicone block and head. Its displacement comes at 3.6 liters. It's a dual overhead cam with 4 valves per cylinder, and it has VVL. The crank is forged steel rather than billet steel, which is used in the Comet engine, I-beam steel, and lightweight forged. These are both the same as what was in the Comet, but the main difference is that crank. Compression is lower at 9.5. Cam profile and VVL, we have a little bit of difference, and the VVL profile is not quite as high. We do have VVT all cams. This is naturally aspirated. The engine used multi-point EFI for the fuel system. We have a twin throttle setup, standard intake, and we're using regular fuel rather than super fuel, which is what was used in the Comet, which explains the lower compression ratio. Fuel mixture is at 14.1, and we have ignition timing at 56 with the RPM limit at 7,500. For the exhaust, I went with tubular headers rather than long tubular, which is what is in the Comet. Dual exhaust, 2-inch diameter, and we have high flow straight through, which is more or less the same as the Comet engine. In the end performance, we get 275 horsepower and 238 foot-pounds of torque. So jumping into the actual trim setup, starting with the gearbox, we have a 6-speed manual, and the gearbox setup is set with that 6th gear being an economy gear, going beyond the estimated top speed. And then we have the first 5 gears being more acceleration gears. We have 7% wheel spin, and our 0 to 62 time comes in at 5.8 seconds, which I think is respectable for this engine and this type of car. I have a viscous LSD for a differential. And the tire setup, we're using Sports Compound Road. And I have 17-inch rims, which are alloy rims. And just to show them, that is the type of rims I'm using. Kind of a more nostalgia look to it. Because a lot of this era is about that nostalgia. A lot of the reintroduction of the different models by these different American car companies was trying to recapture the look and feel, in some regards, to those older muscle cars. For the tire width, I have 245s in the front and 275s in the rear. Brake setup, I have solid disc 2-piston up front and solid disc 1-piston in the rear. Now, I know I promised balancing the brakes in the next year period in my last video, or my last couple of videos, but one of the things I kind of noticed very quickly is really honestly making these brake sizes smaller really didn't make a whole lot of difference. Now, you see there's a color change there to green, but you notice as I bring it back up, it's still green. And the numbers really didn't change at all. So there is really no performance benefit by reducing the size of these brakes. The only thing I'm really doing is giving myself more brake fade. The problem is, with the way that the brakes work now in the game, is the penalty for the brake lockup is bad, but at the same time, the penalty for brake fade is bad. So if you reduce the brake size to try and get rid of the lockup, you get more the penalty of the brake fade. So more or less, it balances itself out, and eventually, you actually start dropping off in performance. As you can see, my sportiness stat just keeps going down and down and down because the brake fade penalty is worse than the lockup penalty. So it really doesn't pay to try and balance the brakes. You just have an additional penalty that you didn't used to have to deal with, is more or less what that change with the brakes has led to. Now, if I switch to drum brakes, though, you'll see my drivability stat goes up because I'm not dealing with the lockup. And, that's one of the arguments that I make, is that in a lot of instances, drum brakes are better than solid disc brakes. But again, I don't want to get into too much detail with that. Let's just move on to the next tab here, which is the aerodynamics. So we have a fully clad under tray, and as far as cooling airflow goes, I go roughly about 10 above the required cooling. Interior wise, we have 4 seats, so there are seats in the back. There's 2 doors, but there are seats in the back, so we have a little bit of practicality, but not a full 5 seats, a 4 seats, so you don't have quite the same room in the back, and they're probably really tiny seats that only truly children probably could fit in. And that's after you hacksaw off their legs, as some back seats tend to be in the modern era. In any case, you have a standard interior with standard CD, power steering and ABS for as standard, and then standard 2000 safety. The suspension, we have standard springs, gas monotube, and passive sway bar. And this is my suspension setup. Let's take a look at the test track here. So top speed comes in at 170.9 miles an hour. Weight comes in at a little over 3,300 pounds. And, well, almost 3,400 pounds. We already saw the 0 to 62 time. And cornering G here. Oh, also weight distribution. We're pretty even, almost 50-50. Let's open up the airfield track and get our time. So the time we get is 1 minute 26.76. So the next trim we're going to look at is just a automatic transmission version of the V6. So we have a 5-speed automatic rather than a 6-speed manual. And the transmission is set up to be more for acceleration. Now, that top speed is a little bit wonky. I think it was supposed to be set to there. I might have to make sure. Well, this should be the only trim that uses that V6. That didn't seem right to me to have it like that. We'll get it out there. I mean, we lose a little bit of time doing that, but I don't think I would have had the top speed set like that. Any case, We get a 0 to 62 time of 6.2. And we do have a little bit reduced wheel spin, and we could actually go up with the spacing and be a little bit more aggressive and match the wheel spin that we had before. But more than likely, in doing that, we wouldn't actually gain any time. So that's why I just kept it with 60 for the spacing, because we're not really reducing that time. We're just bringing up the wheel spin. We still have a viscous LSD here. Ford's compound road. Tire setup is not really changed at all. Brake setup should be the same, more or less. Aerodynamics are the same because we're using the same engine. Interior is the same. Suspension is going to be roughly the same, maybe a little bit of tweaks here and there. But let's jump into the test track. So we have a little bit of reduction in top speed. We're down to 167.8. Weight distribution is a little bit more front heavy. And we do have a slower 0 to 62 time. All those things combined, I think we can be pretty safe in saying that this is going to be a slower overall time. Which is indeed what we see. We've got 1 minute 28.17. So we got roughly about a second and a half additional time, a little bit less than that. Our next trim is V8 powered, so let's take a look at that V8 engine, which again is a detuned version of the engine found in the V8 Comet. So we have an aluminum silicone block and head with dual overhead cam and a displacement of 5 liters, 4 valves per cylinder, and a VVL. We've got forged steel crank, I-beam steel conrods, and lightweight forged pistons. So very similar to the V6 that we saw previously. So compression is the same. Cam profile is probably slightly different, but again, we have VVT with all cams. Naturally aspirated. Multi-point EFI with twin throttle setup. And regular fuel again. And fuel mixture is a little bit different at 14.2. And we still have a RPM limit at 7,500. So again, very similar setup from the V6, just a V8 instead. We do have tubular headers, dual exhaust. Exhaust diameter is increased a little bit because of that increase in power. The end result is that we get 378 horsepower and 329 foot-pounds of torque. For the trim setup, we have a 6-speed manual, as this is a manual transmission trim. We have 2 other trims for the V8, an automatic transmission version and a premium version. Now, I don't have a premium trim with the V6, and I toyed with that, and honestly, if we were being realistic, this model probably would have upwards of 8 trims, but as you're limited to 6 trims in the game currently, I just kept it simple with 5 trims. In any case, the 6th gear is our economy gear, going beyond the estimated top speed, but the 5th gear also goes a little bit beyond that estimated top speed. And that's because even if I make the setup a little bit more aggressive, all I end up doing is increasing the wheel spin, not really improving that 0 to 62 time. Now, technically, we get better timing there, but let's just put it at where it was. So we have 7.6% wheel spin and a 0 to 62 time of 5.3 seconds. Our fuel economy comes in at 20 miles per gallon. And more or less, the setup is very similar to what we saw with the V6, having a viscous LSD. And there really isn't going to be too many changes from the V6 to the V8 as far as these initial tabs. So the tire setup is the same. The brake setup is the same except for the addition of vented disc up front to get rid of brake fade. So we have less brake fade than we saw before. Now, the cooling airflow is going to be different because we require more cooling airflow. But we're keeping the idea of about 10 above what's required. The interior is the same, as this is still the standard interior trim. And the suspension setup is going to be slightly different because of difference in weight, which we're going to see once we get onto the test track, which we see a little bit more weight and the weight distribution a little bit more front heavy as we have that heavier V8 up front. Top speed has increased, though, to 189.3 miles per hour. But because of that increase in weight, we have a little bit less cornering G. So, overall, though, I think we can expect a faster time. And we do indeed get a faster time with 1 minute 24.16. So, we chopped off about a second and a half, I think, from the V6 powered manual transmission trim. Now let's jump into the V8 trim with the automatic transmission. So we have a 5-speed automatic. That fifth gear goes a little bit beyond the estimated top speed, and the result, we get a wheel spin of 6.1% and a 0 to 62 time of 5.5 seconds, which is not too far off of the 5.3 seconds we got with the manual transmission. So that's not too bad. Otherwise, though, the setup is roughly the same. So you've got the same tire setup, the same brake setup, the same aerodynamic setup, the same interior setup. Probably a little bit different suspension setup, but not much different. And then, jumping into test track, we do see that we have a little bit lower top speed at 184.6 miles an hour. Our weight comes in at almost 3,600 pounds. And because of that slower 0 to 62 time, I don't think we'll be surprised that this is going to be slower, just as the other automatic transmission trim for the V6 was. And we see that that is indeed the case. So we have 1 minute 25.19 seconds. So we lost about a second. So a little bit better performance between the different transmission types with the V8 than we had with the V6. Let's jump into the last trim, which is the premium trim. So this has an automatic transmission, which is set up roughly about the same. We have a little bit less wheel spin because we have more weight on the tires. But because of that weight, we have a little bit slower 0 to 62 time at 5.6 seconds. And we have a little bit worse fuel economy at 18.1 miles per gallon. But otherwise, the tire setup and brake setup are going to be the same, as is the aerodynamics. The interior is going to be where we have the big divergence. So we have premium interior and premium entertainment. And we also add on traction control and electronic stability control. Suspension should be roughly the same still, though. Although there's going to be a little bit of difference because of that increase in weight. And jumping into the test track, we see the top speed is now at 184.3. So not too different from the standard trim with the automatic transmission. Weight has gone up, though, to 3,700 pounds. And that, as a result of the slower 0 to 62 time and slower top speed, again, we're going to expect a little bit slower overall time. And we see we add about a half a second, a little bit less than half a second, onto our previous time. So let's take a look at the project setup. Oh, wow, we have a little bit difference here. They actually have changed the pictures. So there must have been an update since the last time I set up the shooting star, because there weren't these different pictures. They were all the same picture. And some of those guys look pretty interesting with their stashes. As a matter of fact, the number of guys that have mustaches outnumber the guys that don't. So we see a trend with our car designers, I guess. In any case, I went with a 50 focus, kind of middle of the road. And with our engine designers, we have a woman. We actually have 2 women now. But mustaches still outnumber non-mustaches, although this guy has a little bit of a soul patch with a mustache. Any case, the focus for the actual car and the engine are more or less the same. Factory, I use a large factory. And automation is at 80, which is the same it was for 2002. And the shifts, I went with 2. So the end result of that is we get 631 cars made per day. And that guy has an incredibly tiny head. In any case, as far as the distribution of the models, I figured that the automatic transmission V6 would probably be one of the more popular options for the V6, and the manual transmission model is right behind that. I figured the V8 with the manual transmission would be the most popular, as that's the more sporty of the trims. But behind that, I figured the automatic premium trim would be the next most sought after. And then finally, at the bottom of all that, the standard automatic transmission. Again, a lot of this is just guesswork, though. For the engines, again, we have a large factory, and we're producing roughly 282 engines for the V6. And For a second there, I thought that was a lady with a beard. Some of the pictures are actually kind of a little bit funny now that they've been introduced. But more or less, I'm matching the shifts to produce as many engines as we need for the V6s. And the V8s, we have a similar concept. So we are producing about 355 engines. And we are matching the shifts to correspond with that. So let's now take a look at the market share. So with the V8 premium trim, we have the three categories we're doing the strongest in are the light sport, muscle car category, which is good because that's the category we're looking for, and the sports budget category as well. We're not doing too bad in the sports category, at least it's being highlighted, but we're doing very well in the fun premium category, which I think is another category that we're looking for because this is the premium trim. So that makes perfect sense that we're doing pretty well in there. We're almost doing as well as we were doing in the sports budget category. Now, we're not really looking for the sports budget category, and based off of our affordability, we're probably having a pretty severe penalty in this category. But let's now jump into the V6 manual transmission trim. And again, the three categories we're doing the best in are the light sport category, muscle car category, and the sports budget. But now we actually see the pony category, which is another category we're kind of trying to hit. But because of our affordability being so low, I think we're being pretty hampered here. And we're not doing quite as well in that fun premium segment as we were doing with the V8 premium, but I think that makes sense. And our strongest one is the light sport. With the automatic transmission, let's see how that changes some things up. We're not going to have quite as high sportiness numbers, which I think our light sport category hurt pretty significantly there, because now our strongest performer is the sports budget. And it looks like we've dropped off with the pony car segment quite a bit because of the drop in affordability. And I'm using a 5% markup for all of the trims, at least I should be. For the V8 with the manual transmission, which should be our strongest performer in the sportiness category, we're doing the best in the muscle car segment, which again, that's great. That's what we're trying to do. And then we have the light sport and sport budget, again, being our other two strong categories. Then finally, we have the V8 with the automatic transmission with the standard interior, which, again, the muscle car market segment is our strongest one. And behind that is the sports budget and the light sport. Fun premium, not as strong as it was with the premium interior and the automatic transmission. In any case, that more or less wraps up our look at the shooting star. So let's compare it to previous year's Comet and just see, and I might as well open the Constellation, just see kind of some of the comparisons we have here. So drivability-wise, this didn't perform all that well. But if you compare it to, for instance, the Star, which is the same body, it's pretty similar, maybe slightly better. So comparing like to like, actually, it looks a little bit worse, if I were to be honest, because like to like, we have the manual transmission base trim versus the manual transmission base trim for the Star, and we see that it's actually worse. So yeah, it looks like it's worse, except for our premium trim seems to... No, actually, again, like to like, yeah, we're underperforming from the Star. So this is probably our worst performer in drivability compared to all of our previous year's models. Sportiness-wise, though, we're in between the Constellation and the Comet. So the Comet's going to be our strongest performer in sportiness, and the Constellation is going to be our next strongest performer until we introduce the Shooting Star. As far as comfort, this is not really that strong of a performer, but it's not too far off of what we got with the Comet here. Matter of fact, I would say better in some areas. Although, when you think about it, this doesn't really have a premium interior trim. Let's compare the Star again. How did the Star do? So it looks like underperforming, again, as far as comfort goes. Prestige. Looks like we're not doing quite as well as the Constellation. We would expect to maybe do a little bit better than we did. Although our best performer is matching the best performer for the Constellation. So maybe we're not doing too bad here. As far as safety goes, though, we're doing not too bad. We're doing better than we did with the Comet for sure, but not quite as good as the Constellation. The Constellation's a bigger, heavier vehicle, though, so that makes a little bit of sense. Practicality-wise, though, we're definitely way more practical than the Comet. And off-road ability, we have a little bit more off-road ability, but we're not really looking for that. Utility, we're outperforming the Constellation, which is something that, again, we weren't looking for, but it's nice to see. And reliability, we're quite reliable, more reliable than the Constellation or the Comet, so that's nice to see as well. Fuel economy-wise, it looks like a stronger performer for the most part. We have a couple trims here that let us down, though. And again, this Constellation, it's not really comparable, though, because the Constellation has only automatic transmissions, whereas we have some manual transmissions here. So comparing it to the Comet, I would say it's roughly about the same. We don't have anything like this, though. We're not having 25 miles per gallon out of any of our trims, so maybe the Comet's slightly better. But the Shooting Star's not bad. As far as weight goes, we're definitely heavier than the Comet, but not as heavy as the Constellation. Emissions, this is our best performer, but this is a later model. This is in 2006. So we do have some benefits of technology. As far as production unit time, though, this is less than both trims, which is exactly what we're looking for. But if we compare it to the Star, again, we're not too far off of the Star. And we're trying to keep costs low. And that's, a success for us, because the idea of the Shooting Star here is that it's not that expensive of a performance-oriented vehicle. So I think we succeed here. So material cost-wise, we're more expensive than the Star, but we keep our production unit cost close to the Star. So it's not going to be too much more expensive than what we had with the Star. In any case, that's going to wrap up the video there. I hope you guys have enjoyed. This is Mouse Gunner signing out.